Today's reading is a bit of a weird one. If you left with some question marks, if you left scratching your head, that makes sense to me. I understand that, and I hope I can shed a little bit of light today on what's happening here. I actually think it's really exciting because I think today's passage is the first step into this new movement of Acts that we are stepping into that is all about the mission to the Gentiles. We've seen since the beginning how the church is kind of pushed out from Jerusalem into the surrounding regions of Judea and Samaria. But now that third part of Jesus' commission to his disciples to go to all nations, that's what we're going to be dealing with, going to all the nations, to the Gentiles. And at this point in the story, this is still a very Jewish story. We're looking at a very Jewish church. Pretty much all of them are either Jews or converts to Judaism. And I think for us living in modern America, we are the beneficiaries of the move to the Gentiles. We have been incorporated in, but I think it's easy for us to forget or sometimes take for granted what a fraught transition that was actually for the early church, that it was complicated, that people had differing opinions and it got messy. And God has to deal with some of their prejudices and their assumptions. And we're going to see that today. But before we get to Peter, I want to start with somebody who talked to God centuries before Peter was ever born. Abraham. You see, God's mission to go to the Gentiles, to all nations, started long before the early church was formed, long before Jesus ever came. It's a story that he's been writing from the beginning, and it starts with Abraham. I'm going to be reading from Genesis 12, the first few verses. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." All families of the earth shall be blessed. We call this the Abrahamic blessing. From the moment that God says to Abraham, "Go," there is this mission for his descendants to go on to bring God's blessing to the nations. We see it all throughout the Old Testament. When God meets the Israelites on Mount Sinai and makes a covenant with them, he says to them, "I am going to make you a nation of priests." It means they're going to be the connection between him and the nations. When he brings them into the promised land, he kind of drops them right at the crossroads of the ancient Near East, basically. He's situating them right in the neighborhood where they can be a vehicle of blessing to the nations around them, to bring peace to other peoples. When we get to the prophets, they consistently write about how the nation of Israel is to be a light to the nations, a hope for the Gentiles. And so in a sense, when Jesus says to the disciples, "Go to all nations, make disciples of all nations," he's not talking about anything new. He's reminding them of this mission that their people has always been on. And I think that somehow Israel had kind of lost its way with that a little bit. We see Peter's vision. He has this vision of this sheet with all of these unclean animals. If you go back to Leviticus 11, you can see the whole list of all the animals that the Jews would have considered unclean according to the Torah. And all of these animals are on that list, and so we can understand why when Peter sees all of these animals, he says, "Surely not, Lord, I will not eat these things. They're not kosher." And he's a good Jew. He's not going to eat something that's not kosher. But God says to him 3 times. I think Luke is kind of winking at us with the whole 3 repetition thing, that sometimes it takes 3 times for Peter. He says 3 times, Do not call unclean what I have made clean. Is he talking about food? I don't know. There's a scholarly debate about that. But what I do know is that the greater point here is not about food. It's actually about people. I think God's point is that he has called people, the Gentiles, clean. You know, in addition to the Torah, over the generations, the Israelites had created this oral law, this tradition of rules based on their interpretation of the law that people would follow. And in this oral law was a rule that Jews should not eat with Gentiles. They should not stay in the homes of Gentiles. They shouldn't have dinner parties where Gentiles are invited, because Gentiles constantly make themselves unclean. Can you see how a rule like that would get in the way, would hinder this church that is predominantly Jewish as they try and move towards the Gentiles, as they try and minister to the Gentiles? Something I think you'll see if you keep your eyes open throughout the rest of this book and throughout the rest of the New Testament, actually, is that there's this question of what does it mean for Gentiles to be incorporated into the church? Do they have to convert to Judaism? Do they have to be circumcised to observe kosher food laws? There's this debate about what it means to bring the Gentiles in, and I think God is taking the first step here to blow apart those assumptions that they have, to knock down their prejudices, and to prepare them for this move to the Gentiles by saying, I have called them clean. Now go. Don't hesitate, he says to Peter. Now go. He's leading this church to join in on this mission to bless the nations. And we are the inheritors of this mission. We're living on the other side of this debate about the Gentiles, but we are no less a part of this mission. God calls us to be a blessing to the nations too. That is still the call for the church. And so for you today, in the spaces that you walk into, in conversations that you have, do you see places that need God's restoration? I bet you can think of a couple places that do. I can. And if we are supposed to be joining God in this mission that he has been writing since Abraham, since before Abraham, what does it look like for you and me to take up this cause and to say, in my corner of the world, in the rooms that I walk into, in the people that I speak to, what needs restoration, and how can I be a partner with God in being the vehicle of that restoration? Will you let him use you? Are you willing? We are called just like them, all the nations. God is putting the world back together piece by piece, and you and I are a part of that.